Hello, and today we are going to be looking at a scenario where the United States attempts to take over the world. I'm going to be doing this as a series where I just keep doing a bunch of other countries in order from strongest to weakest. So, next episode I'll do Russia, then China, India, Japan, and so on and so forth. Now, this video is not going to end with the United States basically annexing the entire world. It's just going to be to a point where they are at such a great level of power that no country or even the rest of the world banded together can stop them. They're basically just going to get to a point where they are unstoppable and no country can challenge them. And then they will be declared the winners of this battle. But if the world is able to successfully disband the country in question, in this case the United States, so if they're able to actually go to war with America and defeat them in a war, then America would lose and get completely dismantled and divided up. The rules of this will be simple. No nuclear weapons will be allowed by any side, and the United States of America is going to be allowed 3 allies throughout this entire battle royale. They can have less than 3, but they're allowed a max of 3, one including themselves, so I guess only 2 allies. And without further ado, let's begin. Now, all major world alliances have been disbanded, such as NATO, the EU, and the UN. However, there are still some alliances, like CANZUK, which is Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. There's also the Gulf Shield Force over here in Arabia. And there is also New Europe, which is an alliance that I made up, which is just some of the strongest countries in Europe, not including Britain because they're a part of CANZUK. Also, ignore how Yemen is colored in here. The first thing the United States decides to do is invade Mexico, and with the invasion of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua also decide to join the war on the side of Mexico to try and stop the United States from invading Mexico. It's America, so that's probably going to fail. By the time the first month of this war rolls around, the United States has already gained quite a lot of territory into Mexico, having completely taken over Baja California, some border areas, and just chunks of Mexico. Over here in the east, Mexico is actually holding off the Americans quite well. However, over here in the west, not so much. However, we have a falling point for Mexico, which is the collapse of the Eastern Front and the American landing on the Yucatan Peninsula. After just 6 months of fighting, Mexico is completely occupied by the United States. After the fall of Mexico, we have Mexico's allies who joined the war to protect them getting invaded by America. Surprisingly, however, we actually don't have them surrendering. This caused the United States to have to start a long, grueling campaign into Central America. But they do make a landing on Nicaragua in an attempt to make these guys fight a war on 2 fronts. We are, however, forgetting that this is America and that these guys down here are not really strong compared to America. In the peace treaty, we see the United States annex a majority of Mexico and puppet the rest of the Central American allies, as well as the rest of Mexico. After this, we have the United States invading and occupying all of Cuba. In the peace treaty, we see Cuba get completely annexed by the United States of America, and as well as the American puppet state actually breaking away from American influence. However, it is here that we have one of the largest wars in this video breaking out, and that is the war between the United States of America and the CANZUK alliance. In the first couple months of this war, we see the United States launch pretty much all of its troops in a full-scale invasion of Canada. Their goal here is to defeat and knock Canada out of the war before Britain and Australia and New Zealand can land troops on Canada, because if they are able to do so, then that will make the war drag on for a lot longer, So the United States is trying to knock Canada out of the war early. That way, the UK and the rest of Kanzuk cannot land troops on American soil or near American soil. From there, the US Navy will gradually defeat the British Navy and eventually land on the UK, destroying not only the UK, but also likely the entire Kanzuk alliance. And if not, America can always invade New Zealand and Australia as well. Although I think they'd have a hard time invading Australia because of all the emus. After about 6 months of this war, Canada is completely occupied by the United States of America. Over here in the Atlantic Ocean, we have American and British navies going to war and fighting quite large battles over here in the Atlantic Ocean, as both sides will have to cross the Atlantic Ocean in order to make a naval landing on one another. But as we know, America's navy is quite a bit stronger than Britain's navy at this point in time, so the UK would probably have a hard time landing on America if they can't beat their navy. After about a year and a half of full-scale naval battles in the Atlantic Ocean, we have the United States making a landing on the United Kingdom. The United States of America makes a landing on Cornwall, United Kingdom. The United States does face heavy resistance on the British Isles. However, they are making progress on the British coast, as they manage to completely siege the English Channel. The UK is trying to hold back the Americans. However, that is easier said than done, as the United States has the strongest army in the world. So it's going to basically just breeze through the British Isles here. After the Americans start to absolutely annihilate the British army, Scotland thinks it would be the perfect time now to rebel and break away from the United Kingdom. After about 5.5 years of war, Kanzuk decides to surrender to the United States of America. After the war, the United States gains all of Newfoundland as well as New Brunswick and British Columbia and Yukon over here. And they also gain Cornwall from the United Kingdom, as that is the area of the UK that they held on to the longest. And down here, they annex all of New Zealand, and they only annex this small little island of Australia because in the war they attempted a naval invasion of Australia once they defeated their navy. However, as I said earlier in the video, they were unable to do so. Not so much because of the Australian military, they were able to breeze through them, but because of the wild emus of the area of Australia they invaded. When they invaded Australia, the emus attacked them, and as a result, the Australian military was able to push the Americans out of their country, meaning that the United States was not going to get much out of Australia in the peace treaty. However, we do, of course, have the disbanding of the Kanzuk Alliance. And yeah, now the world is screwed, because now they only have 2 alliances. However, after the fall of the UK, we actually have the formation of another alliance. This is the CSTO alliance, which is possibly the largest threat to America's grand empire, as well as their effort to taking over the world. This will probably be their greatest challenge right here, the CSTO alliance, as it contains one of their greatest rivals, Russia. A war between the United States and the CSTO is pretty much inevitable. The CSTO decides that they need to expand in order to become a larger alliance. That way they can properly threaten the United States. So they decide to go after Ukraine. We're also going to be taking into account the current Russia-Ukrainian conflict that is going on right now. And this is kind of what the war fronts look like. I know it's a little bit pushed back, but this is pretty close to what it looks like. Ukraine, however, is no match for the combined strength of CSTO and the fact that NATO does not exist and they cannot supply Ukraine is really going to hurt Ukraine, because the reason they're able to repel the Russians in real life is because NATO is supplying them. So, without NATO supplying them, and the fact that Russia and all of the CSTO alliance is using their full military might in Ukraine, yeah, Ukraine's not going to have a fun time. And I know there is the New Europe Alliance, but yeah, they're not too keen on helping Ukraine. As well, that is a much bigger threat to them than this. In the following months of this war, we have the complete collapse of the Ukrainian forces. Eventually, they occupy pretty much all of Ukraine, except for their capital, Kiev, which is defended heavily by both the Ukrainian military as well as the civilians in Ukraine, as they do not want to see their country taken by CSTO. Unfortunately, they are not strong enough, and Ukraine is completely occupied by the CSTO alliance, and in the peace treaty is fully integrated into CSTO. We actually have the CSTO doing something really dumb, as they decide to invade a whole bunch of countries that were once under the Soviet Union all at once. As soon as the war begins, we have CSTO invading the Baltics, as well as the Caucasus and Central Asia. However, these guys are seriously no match for Russia, so they get absolutely wrecked. Skipping ahead a little bit, we have the CSTO alliance completely reforming the USSR. This isn't all they want, however, as they also decide to go to war with all of Eastern Europe. We see the CSTO alliance, as well as the New Europe alliance, invading Eastern Europe, as the New Europe alliance also wants to expand, because that is very threatening. In this war, we see that Eastern Europe is really no match for the two allies crushing in on either side. Skipping ahead a little bit, we see this is how Eastern Europe is divided up. So obviously CSTO is the one that started this war. They're going to get majority of the land. However, the Western Europe alliance does gain quite a bit of Eastern Europe. Now, these alliances know that in order to stop the United States' great empire, they're going to have to band together in order to stop them. So that is exactly what they do. All three alliances form into one major alliance, and they all declare war on the United States of America. If America wins this, then they will pretty much gain control over the entire world, and there will be no country in existence that can stop them. If the blue team wins, then the great evil in this world, known as the United States, will finally be disbanded, and the United States will completely be dismantled and divided up between the Allies. Let the games begin. This war begins with the United States of America unleashing Operation Channel, which is to completely obliterate the blue team navies in the English Channel and take over the French northern coast, as well as to make a landing on Spain, which will help the United States to defeat Europe. They also use their colonies in Oceania to make a landing on the Arabian Peninsula. Skipping forward a while into this war, we see the surrender of Spain and Andorra and the almost capitulation of France. We also see the American Navy landing and taking Sardinia, as well as Sicily, and making a landing on Italy. They also decide to cut off Europe, Western Europe, from the rest of Europe. That way, Russian soldiers and all that can't get into this area. They have also almost capitulated the entirety of the Arabian Peninsula, as it is pretty difficult for Russian and European supplies to make it into Arabia. Over here in Europe, we see the fall of France, as well as Italy, and the United States invading pretty much half of Germany. We also see the fall of the Middle Eastern front. It is at this point in the war that the CSTO soldiers are able to make it to the front lines in full, with the combined strength of their entire military army. And they're able to actually push back the Americans a little bit in the south, while also losing land up north. is at this point that a stalemate is reached. And for about 2.5 years, this front line does not move whatsoever. The American people are starting to begin coups and riots because, they don't like the fact that this war is dragging on for so long. I mean, it's been a stalemate in Europe for 2.5 years. So the United States decides of a good way to end this war, which would be to invade Russia from Siberia. And because there's literally no Russian soldiers up here, because they for some reason didn't expect this, America gets pretty far into Russian territory, forcing Russia to have to pull some troops back from their European front to fight over here in Siberia, which causes the American soldiers in Europe to break the stalemate in Europe. We have the Americans pushing in fast from the east and are now pushing over in and closer to Europe, where they will be able to help their European allies. By the time these two armies meet up, Russia will probably have already surrendered. As we can see, Moscow is highlighted right here in yellow, and it's going to be the United States' main priority to make it over to Moscow and capture it, as that will likely mean the surrender of Russia. And after a very bloody battle, Moscow is captured by the United States, and with American troops coming in hard from the east and the west, the CSTO decides to surrender to the United States. And after the peace treaty is signed, we are left with a impressive United States empire. This empire is divided up into 4 sections, 3 sections. The European section, the American section, obviously, and the Oceanic/Pacific section. And we are going to first go over the European section, which, as you know, they have Cornwall, pretty much all of the coast of France, pretty much all of northern Spain, Sardinia, all of southern Italy, Crimea, as well as a couple other territories in Kherson of Ukraine, as well as for some reason northern Cyprus. I don't know why that's there. There is actually 4 sections of the empire. The 4th section being the Middle Eastern section, which is literally just Yemen and Oman. 5 sections, actually. There's also the Siberian section/Russian section, which is basically just a reverse Alaska. The U.S.'s Pacific section of their empire isn't actually as big as you'd think it is. It's only this Australian island and New Zealand. And of course, the American section, including the United States itself, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Alaska, British Columbia, northern Mexico, and pretty much all the Caribbean. Also, the Coalition Alliance, which is the alliance they fought in this massive war, has to allow military passage and U.S. citizen passage, so basically like free transport or visitation into the countries, basically open borders. All the countries they fought in that massive war have to allow open borders to the United States. That way they can easily access their colonies in Europe, Middle East, Asia, and all that. So, the United States is officially the victor of this war, of this, battle for the world, and the United States has effectively taken over the world. Of course, they haven't taken over the entire world, but they pretty much have the world under their thumbnail, as well. The United States is so powerful, no other country in the world can do anything about it. The United States established a massive colonial empire that is unmatched by any country in the world. Of course, it's not the largest colonial empire, but it is definitely by a large margin the strongest. The only country I could even see attempting to stand up to the United States would be China, as surprisingly, that is the only country, famous country, I guess, that they haven't fought in this video. And you'd think, oh, United States, China, greatest enemies, obviously they'd fight if anything like this ever happened. Well, they didn't in this video.